Welcome to the Matcha Minutes. I'm Joe Wilson. 2 years ago, Jeff Klemp entered the Kansas Senate as a freshman legislator. Today, he's become a key voice on major issues and has now been tapped as Ty Masterson's running mate for lieutenant governor. We'll discuss property taxes, economic development, veterans issues, and the future of Kansas. Here's my conversation with Jeff. Jeff, thanks for being on the podcast today. It's exciting. You were here last year as you were just getting into your new role. Now you're running for lieutenant governor. So much has happened to you in a whole year.
Oh, boy. Right. Shouldn't we just start by saying happy belated birthday? You're 45 again.
No,
That's right.
I'm 52. I was inundated with texts and phone calls yesterday. So once again,
Good.
But you were the first person to text me even before my family. I'm going to throw that out there.
Interesting. Good.
You've gone from business owner to state senator and now candidate for lieutenant governor. What has motivated you to transition into public service in such a fast way on top of it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. So I jumped into this as a few years back, and I really felt we had an opportunity to make a difference for our district, District 5. And then also how it would weigh in and move Kansas forward. So I think it's met my expectations, although things always are a little slower. But it's, I think in business, if you have a small business person or somebody that's running a business, you kind of just move forward and you're always stepping forward, you're always moving fast. But I felt like I had enough understanding of the process to get in, make a difference. And not a lot of business people do that. Until they look forward to retiring. And I felt like there was this window to how my businesses were situated where I could jump in and have the support of my partners and also family to jump in and make a difference. So it's worked so far. We've been able to craft wonderful legislation that's benefited the entire state, but also specifically our community.
Many people see you as a businessman. What lessons from building companies like Century Van Lines have you learned to be able to apply to local government?
You know, one of the things I've noticed from a government perspective is a need to refocus on small business. The state in general likes to sometimes chase shiny objects, but I think what I'm learning with kind of the leadership team that's already there, that's there now, that there's an opportunity to really focus on the core of our state, which is agriculture, farming, and small business, and a need to, if the opportunity arises where we're in different roles, there's this opportunity to refocus on small business and the things that matter. You think about how there's all around our state, 105 counties around the state, we have wonderful businesses that are small, and whether it's your business or my business, and we hire folks within the community and we help uplift the community, and that happens all over the state. I think that allows us to kind of broaden our folks. Today we have an outflow of people. Last 7 years we have an outflow of people. How do we start to stem that? I think it's also a refocus on small business that allows us to do that.
Last time you were on the show, I had to really convince you to be on the show. You really didn't know who Joe Wilson was. Over the last couple of years, I've really gotten to know you and the business that you serve and the business that you do, serving from an IT standpoint. One of the things that I've learned about one of your local business, Century Van Lines, I know we keep bringing that up, but being a second chance business owner, how and why? I mean, some people would be very nervous about that, but you embrace it and you're giving people opportunities. I've seen you in action, really give people opportunities and try to mentor some individuals.
Yeah. Everyone needs a helping hand. And in our world, over the last 17 years of building Century Van Lines, and we built it from kind of a distressed business, and now we're one of the largest movers of our military in the Midwest globally. And I think that has created opportunities for folks that need second chances, that want a second chance. And I've been doing this long enough, you know who's digging a hole or who wants to dig out of a hole. And we're always willing to help someone dig out of a hole. And that helping hand is a true thing. And whether it's members of my leadership team, workers that work for us, there's wonderful humans that have made mistakes historically that can be great assets to a community and society. And so we focus on that. And you think about just incarceration in general, a significant over 90% of everybody's going to get out at some point. And if we don't look to whether it's find creative opportunities or even while they're incarcerated, if we don't look for those folks to help train and educate, and I'm part of that process as well, I think we're doing an injustice, or it's going to result in recidivism that we would rather not have. So let's find ways that we can move folks forward, and there's great companies like Zephyr and other groups that live in that world as well. And when you have successes, and we have many successes, and people raise families that have gone through these, and they're raising their children, they're in our school systems, and they're contributing to our community, I think it feels good. And whether that's building decks for the churches and homeless shelters and other things, we participate in a lot of different things. And it's nice to be a part of the community. And from that perspective, it gives you a whole different way to look at what we do around here and how we can help. And I've historically believed that whether it's in politics at a large tent or it's in the business world, there's wonderful humans everywhere that we can bring into a space, and then we all grow together.
You always talk about, and I say this from having getting to know you very well over the past couple of years, you always want to do what's best for your city, your state, your area. There's a passion there that some people don't have, some people do have. Where does that passion come from for you?
Well, I have a family that's immersed and in our community. They love our community, and I've kind of grown up in that. Historically, our family was here before state was a state, so we've been around a while. But it's always, whether it's building businesses in the early 1900s and to where we are today, it's always been around the area. And I think the more we can participate and give back, the more we can help our community rise to the occasion. And I think with Leavenworth in general, the first city of Kansas, it's easy to get proud about a community that is first of all, the first city of Kansas. I always when I'm on the stump talking, I always say, Abe Lincoln didn't go to Wichita, he came to Leavenworth, Kansas. So it's a reminder that I love to remind the state that we have this opportunity with the first city of Kansas to be a beacon of light, and they don't always look at it through that lens. Whether it's Overland Park or Wichita, we have a wonderful community here. And figuring out how we craft creative solutions to allow this city to grow, whether it's organically or we nudge it forward a little bit, I think it's just something that's in the blood.
Having only been in the Senate for 2 years and now running for lieutenant governor, you gained traction faster than most people. But why was that?
Some people are there to craft policy and some aren't. Some are there to contribute in other ways. What I've learned when I was up there was there's a lot of caring people sit on both sides of the aisle, but there's a lot of caring people that feel they have the right finger on the pulse. We don't always agree on that. And sometimes those are spirited conversations, but in business and small business, when you're just running, sometimes you don't have time to sit back, develop this huge understanding of something. You just start running and see who gets in the way. And I think with policy, and I went up there with a clear mission of what are things that can advance, first of all, District 5, but also the state of Kansas. And what I learned was there's an opportunity there, and you ask a few questions, and all of a sudden you got to figure out you have to craft policy, and you're working with research and other groups to craft that policy. And on top of that, then you got to figure out how do you get everybody to vote for something, and how do you go about that educational process. Well, as a small business with a new idea, you kind of have to advance it in certain ways as well. So I took a little bit of that understanding, and also my history of working in billion-dollar corporations and leading different divisions. You also figure out the political side of the world, even big business, of how do you advance ideas through a business culture, and you take those same kind of spirited thoughts and move those through the political side. And we had a decent first year and a very good second session as far as advancing things that make our communities better.
What's something you wish every voter who saw what happens in Topeka, what would you like them to actually know that maybe you didn't understand before you went up there?
How do you corral enough votes to move a piece of legislation forward? And sometimes you think about our 105 counties, and I'll use property tax as a great example. I continue to feel we've left good legislation on the table, but you think about Western Kansas, you think about rural areas, urban areas, and how do you get all of those, whether House of Representatives or senators, to coalesce behind with enough votes? And over the last few years, you've had a lot of vetoes from a governor who sees life differently. And so you have to then get 2/3 of a majority, and you say, well, you have a supermajority. Well, what that means is we have enough votes if everyone agrees. And most of the time, not everyone agrees. And so you have to figure out what the message you're trying to sell, how do you get people to understand that is going to be good for all of Kansas, and look at it from a holistic perspective. And I think property tax is an area of opportunity. We continue to find creative ways to try different things where hopefully it can appeal to the masses. In the Senate, we did have enough to override the governor's veto. Get frustrated with our governor from time to time because she vetoes every single piece of property tax legislation there is, because has a different perspective on things. But where we had a miss was Western Kansas Republicans as well as Johnson County Republicans. There's enough votes there to have us miss on property tax. But I think there's some creative thoughts about how do you take a different bite of that apple in ways that work with those different areas to come up with tweaks to a solution that we can all be proud of.
It's interesting because as I listen to you talk, it's not just right versus left, but it's right versus right at sometimes.
Yeah.
And there are issues, and I've heard you say this before, that even extend beyond right versus left, and it becomes Western Kansas versus Eastern Kansas.
Sure.
And people will bond based on what is in the best interest of, you hope, in their community, not for other reasons.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, it's on property tax. One of probably your farthest left in the Senate, there's a senator who voted for it. And you think about every door everyone's knocking on has a property tax concern, whether that's an owner or a renter, because renters are going to see that in their rent going up if it gets passed along. And many of the landlords pass along that increase that they're getting, and it goes directly into the rent. So you have rent that, once people look at it from that perspective, it doesn't really matter what side you're on. We're all affected. And it's so I do think that there's a lot of learnings in how we craft kind of something that's going to be as contentious as it is, because we're going to ask somebody to override a veto. We have to make sure that it's good for all of Kansas, so everyone feels good about the override.
You've been, and I've heard people say this about you, that you build bridges, that you work across the aisle. How hard is that for you to do, especially when you disagree with somebody?
It can be challenging. However, I would tell you the legislation that I ran that was significant for Kansas has all been bipartisan. I haven't all of my votes that I've taken have not always been bipartisan. Some have been very partisan. However, I tend to see how we move something forward in ways that benefit the large tent, and that large tent is the masses. So that's been, I think, one of the reasons that I've continued to be on the ballot for another position is, I think we look at things through ways that can benefit Kansas and bring in a lot of my history and background. I think helps us move forward in ways that I think we can all get pretty excited about. But it's been difficult at times to have conversations. And I would tell you, some of the folks that are running for governor today that are left-leaning senators, I have cordial relationships with all of them. We see life very differently, but I do think that in a conversation, I can go have a conversation about a piece of legislation, and we can have one-on-ones, and I do have those one-on-ones with a lot of folks that sit in very different parts of the political spectrum. And anyone that comes in is always going to have a respectful conversation where I pay attention to it, because I want to understand what I may not know, then also learn from that, and there might allow me to understand and really think through my positions when I'm taking the vote.
And that's interesting to hear you say, because I think everybody sees, especially the Republican Party now, as just being an echo chamber of itself. But you just admitted that listening to other people, there's an opportunity to learn something there. Why can't we get that message out to everybody?
I think the division and hate in our political parties, it definitely crosses both sides.
Sure.
And it's not healthy, and I don't necessarily like it. It's unfortunately a reality. There's a lot of money that's driven behind that. It's disappointing. But I do feel like what I can do is control myself, and I can control how I react to people and how I'm respectful to folks. And I don't think you'll find one senator that I work with, no matter what party they're in, that would ever say they've had a conversation that wasn't respectful. And I'll disagree, and they can sometimes be spirited, but they'll walk away feeling like, you know what, we didn't come to an agreement, but he understands what I'm trying to say, and he was listening with the intent to learn. I think that's it. Just having somebody come in for 5 minutes because you want to give them the check the boxes, I don't have time for that. I have time to come on in and let's talk about it. There's always something you can learn from somebody. And so I just kind of live by that rule. And I think it serves me well. And at some point when it's not, I keep moving on, and I got lots that I can work on.
You've done a lot and said a lot about supporting our veterans and military families. Why is that a priority for you?
Well, I have an old man as a veteran, right? He's
true.
88 with, I think he lost his filter at 65, but he's, you think about folks that in real wars that have died on behalf of keeping us where we're at in the greatest country in the world. And I think that showing an appreciation for folks that give their lives for, and just their careers for advancing, the causes that they believe in, I think are worthy of our attention. And so one of the things when I was running, I noticed in the Senate, we didn't have a Veteran Affairs Committee. And talking with the Senate President, Ty Masterson, we kind of agreed that it's time to have that. And so when I came on, I was put on that. We have Mike Thompson, the weatherman out of Overland Park, who heads up that committee. And we have wonderful veterans on both sides of the aisle that we've moved some good piece of legislation forward. And I think it'll continue to be a powerful committee, continue to grow. And it was already a great one in the House that already does this, but now having one in the Senate where we can coalesce and work together on good pieces of legislation, I think is going to be important. And also giving veterans to an opportunity where they can be heard. And that's those are all important things that I spend a good time on them. And we're swamped on committees on the Senate side. There's just not a lot of us to go around, and we have significant things that need to get done.
I'm going to go back to your comments on property tax being, probably the top one or two issues in the state, having run for two different offices. I heard my share of concerns about property tax. And I think the thing that people are most disappointed about is that we couldn't accomplish anything. But what is the real reason, when you really get down to the brass tacks, that we couldn't accomplish something? We know the voters want this. It's across the whole state, I imagine. Why can't we get something across the line that helps everybody?
Well, you get probably a little longer answer than you're looking.
Oh, I know I am. I know I am.
So, to be fair, what doesn't get talked about, and we don't blow our horn too often on it, is we have over $2 billion worth of of tax relief that has happened in the last few years. Some before me and some during my time. So there are significant things that we've moved forward. But to your point on property tax, you're not wrong. I'll give you a good example. Property tax relief with a cap, you can argue, is it a starting point? I would argue that it is. It started a conversation. Mm-hmm. You put a cap on something. Well, Western Kansas feels, there's a lobbyist group out there that felt that this could negatively impact farmers. We felt we had enough information, enough data where that was not the case. I feel like we had the right information, and historically, looking back 30 years, there would be little to no impact from a farming perspective on farms, because farmers have their own tax formula for farmland and ag just in general. And I want to 100% say how much we appreciate that. With 87% of our land farmland, it's we cannot ever lose sight of that. And I think when you think about the tax chair and the teams that are working together, we took into consideration to that specific issue so we didn't impact them in a negative way. The narrative got out so quick that it was a negative when I felt it was not accurate. The data would show it wasn't accurate, that you turn a handful of votes from a House perspective, because we did get it passed on the Senate side with 2/3 majority, because what we're going after is, at the end of the day, we're crafting a constitutional amendment to allow people to have a voice. Whenever we take that voice away from the people, I get burnt up, and I take it personally, because it is kind of getting back to the roots of people in our state. And I feel like we do a disservice where we don't allow people to have a say. Whether they decide that they want a cap or they don't want a cap, I felt it was a bad decision that we couldn't get the ability from a constitutional amendment to get that across the goal line. Then you have Overland Park and their team of legislators feel that this is a local control issue. You need to stay out of our space. At the same time, I have my counties and my cities in my area, many of them, not all of them, saying, we agree with you on the cap. You look at Baser, they just imposed a cap on themselves for what they can control from the city. I was like, all right, that's unique and interesting. But not everybody looks at it that way. We have this egregious growth that sometimes the state needs to put guardrails on things to kind of create this roadmap. And so we tried a couple different ways to look at that. But even though you may have a super majority, you have folks that either, whether they're looking at local control or they're looking at it through the farmer's eyes. So now the next step is, can we bring those groups together to coalesce around a single idea that we know is going to get across the goal line? And I think that's what's being worked on this summer.
So this turns into one of those east-west issues, kind of.
Yeah. And you know who's stuck in the middle? Kansans, taxpayers. And and I think finding ways to truly lead and unite, you get a little, you can move legislation forward with in the governor role and we're running for that office with governor and lieutenant governor. You would be able to pass guardrail legislation to stem the pain, but it's not all driven around those things. I think we also have to look at how fast and what's the cost of redoing the appraisal process, because that's a little bit out of, and it's, there's a lot of folks that can argue a lot of different things on this. Do you cap things, or do you find a way to just grow your base so you have more money coming in? And I would say we don't have a wonderful tax policy. Just kind of those things continue to get vetoed to create an environment where people want to come into the state. You kind of have to pay and urge them to come into the state. Having a tax policy that you can be proud of, that's inviting, that doesn't drive our seniors out of their homes. Mm-hmm. I think those are the things that allow people to want to stay and grow and businesses to come to the state. And I would tell you that I have a working relationship with our government, but every time you try and craft and mold a tax policy, there's always significant vetoes. You kind of start to say we need a different seat at the top of the food chain there in the governor's office, so you can start to enact responsible pieces of legislation that can allow us to have an environment that's inviting for large and small businesses to grow here in the state of Kansas.
The current tax plan for our agriculture out west is different than they're taxed differently than the rest of us right now. Is that accurate?
Very much so. Yeah.
So how come we can't create an amendment to the Constitution that just impacts those people that aren't ag? Why does it have to be all or none?
I think the feeling was you should be able to craft policy that includes everybody. Ag would still be, their formula doesn't change, but the houses on those farmlands are caught in the middle of this. So they do want to participate. And I think we're seeing some pressure on some of the legislators out west to say, you know what, you could have made a different decision. And that creates an environment that might be conducive to moving it forward. Sometimes legislation takes too long to move forward when it's good and responsible. And if you don't require a 2/3 majority to have an override, you could probably move that through. So there's going to be potentially a window of opportunity if there's with a change in the governor.
Aside from property tax, what has been the most difficult issue for you to face on the Hill?
Taxes in general. I sit on tax, so I love tax. Because you're in this quandary of how do we get our tax policy to be competitive, and then you have this urge to entice businesses to come into the state through incentives, which most fiscally conservative Republicans say we can't do that. But if you try and stem the outflow of people, fixing this over here, which is your tax policy, allows you to really minimize the incentives on what you're doing as a state to invite folks in. And I think that balance has been a little challenging for many of us that sit on the right, because our goal is how do we broaden the base to minimize the pain from taxes on normal citizens, Kansans.
If Masterson-Klemp gets elected into the office, what specific property tax reform will you go after?
Well, that's the legislators bringing that to the table, so the governor can sign that. But I think there'll be a window of opportunity for whether it's property tax. But I also think what it does, it'll allow us to really focus on small business and how do we create an environment for small business to whether they start here in the state of Kansas or grow, and they're centered around ag, rural healthcare, aviation, because as we look to grow, whether it's drones and other things, there's a lot of different categories that we want here in the state, especially around advanced manufacturing. I think that creates all of these new pockets for opportunities within the state of Kansas. And I think that entire tax policy, as we look at that, can fundamentally change and shift in a way that makes us competitive as a state, because our surrounding states, we're not as competitive, but there are also states that haven't had the top of the food chain with one party and the legislature with another. I think I'll continue to use the word responsible tax incentive policy that is inviting, and the more inclusive we can do that, I think it starts to minimize these chasing shiny objects.
One of the big things that was passed was the STAR bonds that are bringing the chiefs to Kansas, specifically to Wyandotte County. Yep. You've received a little bit of criticism from that in the way that the people are seeing the tax revenue. What would you say to those critics that we are getting from this that maybe they're not seeing?
Yeah, I think most of the energy is from Wyandotte County citizens, and I think it's probably misdirected. And if people want to say we are not incentive based, I understand that. And what I tend to focus on is the data we had in front of us of the 22,000 jobs for significant years that are well-paying jobs of folks that are the salt of Kansas, whether it's sheet metal workers, pipe fitters, electricians, welders. It's a whole series of folks that are raising families on these jobs. And you go from a good example from the American Royal and the thousands that are employed today, and they roll over to a stadium build or the entertainment district that surrounds that, or the Mattel theme park that's in Wyandotte County. And I think where all of us get a little sideways is when you give an incentive, we can guide our locals not to layer onto the incentive program and give, whether it's property tax or other things, away. I think that creates the angst, because the goal should be how fast can we get through a STAR bond incentive to have it start paying back into the system. I'll take the Legends as an example. It's dishing out now. It's putting about $35 million back into the till. Well, that's a big number that if we can benefit that community, if the community takes those dollars and invest it in ways that minimize the pain for the taxpayer. And that is a local control issue. We craft an environment at the state level to allow folks to come into a community. It's the local control that needs to decide whether they want that in their community or not. And we don't play typically in that game, but what we learn from that is maybe we need some tighter guardrails on things or minimize some of these things. What's going to come into to Leavenworth was a smaller version of that. That if you think about our mall for nearly 20 years, it's been empty and with writings on the rooftops and
which have gotten cleaned up, and grass that's been cut.
Thank you. And the grass has been cut, but the pressures around that, when you could have this in a wonderful piece of our community in center of town, a robust environment that is going to come, because you've now created an environment for these groups to come in. And not everybody likes some of these things, and they come in and they have a right to voice those opinions. But I do think we have this little opportunity on what's going to come into District 5, which is Leavenworth. And I also have Wyandotte County, where all that construction is also where I sit. So I have, conversations with that legislative or that leadership and city commissioners of Wyandotte County and county commissioners. And they all want the same thing. We just have to take the local incentives and make sure it gets back to the people. And I think that's some of the frustration that they see, is it doesn't always make it back where some of these things are happening. So hopefully that's helpful.
You crafted or tweaked the Star Bond legislation to include dilapidated malls.
Yeah.
Was Leavenworth the incentive behind that?
There's 3 or 4 malls around the state of Kansas. Leavenworth was absolutely why I stood up and helped lead that. You had to adjust the size of the market. You had to pull Leavenworth out of the Kansas City metro, because there's no way you could have a chief size deal in Leavenworth. So we looked at smaller communities that had disruption or dilapidation to try it. At the end of this year, it goes away. So we put a short time period on it. We wanted to try a few areas and see if it was going to work, because it will be a petri dish or a roadmap to say, do these kinds of things work in smaller communities? My bet is we're going to be glad we did that, because it creates a moment in time for some opportunity. And we've had a lot of decline in this community, and there's no reason for it. Our proximity to Kansas City and our proximity to things should say we shouldn't be declining. We should only be growing. And this gives us a little jump start on that I think will be a building block that rolls over into Lansing and rolls over into other areas. And the commission and the different commissions and their personalities will advance things that'll be good for the community as well.
Part of that legislation suggests that 20% new population needs to come into the community to spend money.
Yeah.
What do you envision as something that might do that?
The draw? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to get ahead of my wonderful city on that, but there are draws that invite, and there's examples. I'll give you an example. Whether it's a regional museum or a nationwide museum or some other type of entertainment draw that has the ability to draw a certain age group year after year, where your surrounding schools and other groups have a desire to bring those classes in. And I would say one that's unique and a little bit different is maybe a educational tool, virtual tool that is centered around law enforcement. Mm-hmm. That could be a really interesting, unique type of an idea that brings people in, and that also brings in the lunches, and it brings in folks from throughout the region, which is across the states, because it would be a training hub on really tactical, advanced ways to train the new type of a police officer or sheriff or highway patrol. Those are just to name a few, but there's new ways that we're looking at how we do that. And one of the groups is actually going to be founded out of Salina. But you've taken all of these hours of content and, you kind of build that into a virtual training tool, but you still have to have a regional and a hub where you can handle that type of training. But I do see Leavenworth, which has historically been, whether it's prisons or law enforcement in general, as a great hub for something like that, or our community, whether that crosses over into Lansing, but it's our area. And that would be bringing in a significant number of people into our community, because the goal is 20% more, but it's also about reducing leakage. And I know the city's talked about that before as well. What leaves our community to go, whether it's to the Legends or across the river into Missouri, and how do we keep those kinds of create those types of business opportunities locally for that?
We have seen recently there's been some I don't want to say some contention. I'll say some friction between Fort Leavenworth and our county commission, perhaps the cities. How do we mend that relationship? How do we go forward and drive that? Because the military is such a huge part of our economy, and people will say, well, they just leave and they go across the bridge and they don't spend any money here. Not true. We have a good portion of them that live in our communities. They're paying rent. They're eating in our restaurants. Maybe not everybody. Some people are going to look for something different. But how do we mend that relationship so that everybody feels enfranchised to move forward together?
Not sure that always is the case, but it's. I do feel that the economic impact in our region, especially in our community, is a net positive by having them here in a significant way. We've had some great conversations with the new General Eisenhower, and he is very much motivated to continue to nudge his folks into our communities to participate. And I like that's kind of one of his focuses. And I know there's been some issues, whether it's county level or just in general, but I do think that there's the recognition of the value, the significant value and the economic impact they bring to the community is a big deal. And I do think part of what the state can do is crafting legislation that creates a tax policy that invites them to stay. And that is also around veterans, with how they pay in their property tax and their taxes in general. And can we provide relief there, like so many other states? So we don't see a Texas tag, we see a Kansas tag. And all of those kinds of things bring, whether it's at the local level into the courthouse, some additional fees that are being charged. I think all of that starts to build a environment where we see more of their participation in our community. And so I think the state can help with that, but I also think that just the recognition of their significant impact in our community, whether it's the VA or it's the military base with Command General Staff College, and then also our state prison systems, there's a lot of infrastructure that doesn't participate in property tax, but they do pay water bills, they do pay electrical bills, and all of those contribute to helping allow us to be stable, more stable, with the revenues coming in those different categories. So there's a lot of wins there. I'm a huge fan of our military, and just from one of our businesses, we do a lot with the military. So we love the fact that we have a great relationship there. But at the end of the day, I think the city and the county recognizes that, but doing a little more to cohesively unite might be a good next step.
Do you ever see a world where our state is not relying on property tax, or property tax goes away as a source of revenue?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's creative solutions being looked at, such as a consumption tax. You have to pay for the infrastructure in the schools, so you have to always build plans that look at that. But if you start looking at, consumption, then you got to kind of have the argument, well, that maybe disproportionately affects low income, because now you're inviting everything that gets bought is paying down and paying for the services that we want. So I do think that there's a lot of, and that's what's probably going to frustrate everybody, is you're looking at that. You have to, a good example, a small community out in Western Kansas. Well, they don't generate enough consumption to pay for the services they're going to want. So now you have to figure out, where do you pull that additional revenue from? And so those are the fun things that I get to work on, and I enjoy doing those things. But it's also, to get to whether it's zero property tax or income tax, there's some states are all trying different things. The money being spent is not less. The money being spent is, yes, to pay for the services and the infrastructure that you want in your communities, but it still is, there's different ways to skin that cat. My feeling is on property tax, you're taxing a few to pay for a large piece, and especially in our world here in Leavenworth, with so much not paying into the rooftop property tax bill, it puts a lot of pressure on a smaller amount of folks.
I've heard up to 60% don't pay.
I think it's about 54% of rooftops anyway.
Sure.
But it's still a big number, and it's from a state perspective, there's I think it's the highest community for that, but I also think that it also puts constant pressure on our locals to be fiscally responsible and manage tight budgets. And I feel for the most part, everybody's always trying to make the best decisions they can for the folks that they represent.
One more thing as we talk about, stay on this topic, is unfunded mandates. We hear local governments screaming about there's so many unfunded mandates by the state.
Sure.
Is that a fair criticism?
The state is responsible for crafting legislation that puts the rules of engagement for the state that follow down to the local level. At the same time, those have to be funded somehow, and it's upon the locals to manage that as best as you can. And there's that's a whole longer conversation. But I also feel that some of the things that we do with allowing for potentially some increases in some fees, when you say the word increase, and it's like, how do we not do that? Mm-hmm. And it's minimizing any type of request for a mandate for funding is a great thing to, whether you go back and look at the things that historically the state's asked the locals to fund or requires the locals to fund, or you look at anything new. I think it all has to be re-looked at to see where can we streamline things. And that's whether that's driver's licenses and how you get all of those done, and can you do those online, and can you help us find ways to streamline through software and other things to minimize some of the costs and the expense. I think you have to look at all those things as we go forward. There's some opportunities for improved efficiencies. And I know how hard the folks work up here at the courthouse and throughout all of our local governments. So this is giving them additional tools so they can be more efficient, and minimizing waits in line and all the other things that people get burred up about because they're paying for a service, and sometimes it takes 2 hours to wait in line to get something accomplished. So it's not for lack of work or effort. It's really, are there ways we can improve that process? And the state will have to get behind that and look at creative ways to do so.
I want to shift to the campaign a little bit. And I'm interested, why did you decide to join Senator Masterson's ticket?
What I've seen in our Senate president has been a Senate president that has coalesced a caucus, which is the Republican caucus, mm-hmm. that has allowed us to and led to advancing conservative values in a way that's been meaningful for the state. For many of the folks that don't look at it through that lens, they probably have a different perspective. But I also looked at what I brought to his arsenal of talents and how I could complement a lot of what his vision is. Moving so fast as learning the legislative process, building relationships, and leading to advance legislation that's been good for Kansas. I think he felt that with my business background, coming also from a historical ag perspective, growing up on a farm, and understanding the appreciation for ag, as well as, and I would say the other big topic would be teachers, with mm-hmm. my mom that's taught for 3 decades, that in the public school system. That historical background and especially our region's a contentious region, where it's District 5 is known for harsh politics, mm-hmm. which I don't like any of that. But I look at kind of this area. I think I bring a lot of business background that would complement what he's wanting to accomplish, and whether that's small business legislation and help craft and move things forward that'll be really good for Kansas that we can be proud of. I think that is something that he respected and wanted on his team. And I think from what I see from him is he's very respectful. Folks may not always like his decisions, but his decisions, exactly what he is. He's tried and tested and he's true. And as a Republican with conservative values, it is what I would be looking for to be in that role. And I think we've continued to advance things that over, his time in the legislature and my short time in the legislature that have teed us up to where if you change who's at the top, you can kind of craft a policy that a large tent can be really proud of. And I think he's the most capable to be able to get that accomplished. I look at the others that are in the campaign, and some folks are being contentious and ornery, and I don't see in the party there's need for that, but it's how someone's choosing to run their cycle, their candidates, their team. And then there's everybody think they can add value in their own way. And then we have a whole side of the Democrats that have folks that I work with. Two of them I know quite well, that I work with in the legislature, or in the Senate. And I see the world very differently than them, but they're running on what they think is right. But I think Ty has, the best. He's the strongest and best one for where I sit to lead us forward, and I'm honored to be a part of the team.
What role do you think the lieutenant governor should play beyond simply being the next man up?
Oh yeah, no, we have to take on a handful of significant projects that need, whether that's small business legislation, really focused on a strong, putting our best foot forward as a state to really go after a lot of wonderful types of businesses that we want to invest here in the state. I sit under the AG also in a sandbox. I'm the chair of a sandbox, which is what types of businesses are burdened with regulatory compliance issues. What do we want to allow into the state? And we can test those within that sandbox. And I think that that's a start of a process around commerce. I think there's also this discussion around water conservation. We don't talk about that too often, but we have an Olagala aquifer out west that's being depleted. And how do we craft creative people to come in small business to find creative ways that, from a water conservation perspective, we can do some creative business ideas that can help with that. Because even underneath that, you have a larger aquifer that's immersed in shale, and there's creative ways that we should be thinking about to first of all use less water, but second of all, how do you have access in a responsible way to the table that's available to you already?
As part of the Masterson-Klemp ticket, what are your top 3 priorities, or yours and Senator Masterson's top 3 priorities?
The Senator Masterson's. That's a fair point. Property tax, there's tax legislation in general, which really falls under a central umbrella, which is affordability. Affordability is a significant issue, and we're plagued with, whether it's inflation, we all follow the cost of fuel, cost of eggs, milk, and some of that's driven at the federal level. But I do think there's things that we can do within the state. So we have an affordability, it would be number 1, healthcare would be 2, and the role that we play in rural healthcare. And I talk about it a little bit, but one of the things I was most proud of was advancing Alzheimer's, dementia, and mental health, which is a significant piece of legislation that I sponsored on the Senate side. And then Dave Beeler on the House side, who sits in a chair of a committee that's influential in that same space. But the advancements in Alzheimer's, dementia, mental health are so significant over the last few years, especially with the University of Kansas hospital system and Dr. Burns. He is probably one of the top doctors in the world in this space. There's some great things that he's done to advance this. And one of the things we put our energy into was, how do we advance that to rural hospitals, allowing rural hospitals to have additional billings and other things around that, which also touches on the Affordable Care Act, which is a significant number of hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming into that. And to qualify for that, you have to have unique and different types of things. And whether that's drones playing in that, whether it's delivering medical supplies or extracting out humans, or there's all kinds of really creative things that are underway to take advantage of the funding that's available in that space. And so I get really excited about the affordability. I think the third part is, you think about agriculture and what we're doing in that space. It's wanting to ensure that our farmers always understand that they are a huge priority, and farming is a huge priority for what we do here, but we have conservation issues that affect what they can and shouldn't grow, or how do we advance the different things that they are growing. I think building a robust team that addresses some of those big concerns, I think, is where our priorities sit. And you go down the list and you can hit on any of the topics that are important, and we probably have a vision statement for each of those. We don't want to shy away from any of those, but I think when you ask the question, affordability would be at the top of the food chain.
When your time in public service is over, what do you hope people say about your leadership and your impact?
It's simple. Left the state better than he found it. Whether that's in anything yet.
Such a business response. Such a business response. I like it.
You want to leave things better than you found it. You want to invite people in where they feel respected, because we give our time, we give our energy, and some folks are truly in pain, and how do you look to do things that help alleviate that?
We're going to shift into our second segment. This is the more fun segment. At least I find it to be a little more fun. Coffee or energy drink?
Yes. I drink both. Yeah.
KU or K-State?
I graduated from KU.
Rock chalk.
I would say that I love my purple. I'm just telling you, they put out fantastic work product as well, or people product as well.
Very political over there.
It was.
Very political.
Yeah.
Favorite restaurant in Leavenworth County?
Interesting. I'm a Metropolitan Steakhouse guy.
Okay.
So I go there at lunchtime. I see a lot of the farmers that go there. So I like hanging with folks like that. I like Luigi's downtown. So I like, there's Town Pub. If you want a good burger, dude, you're going to make me name them all.
I feel like that's where you're headed.
I'm going down the path. I don't want to make anybody upset. And you said Leavenworth County, because you also have Kelly's out in Baser.
Mm-hmm.
I have meetings out there. So, and they have
they're a pretty good burger too.
They have a new breakfast spot, a cafe that's used to be right where the coffee shop was out there too. So,
Flashbacks is gone from Tonganoxie, moved in over there.
That's correct. And Rodeo for if you want good Mexican, because I'm out there for some meetings too. So if we go into Wyandotte County, I got more, but
okay, gotcha. I got you. Right. You're going to name everyone. Gotcha. Most influential book you've read?
There's an interesting book that's out. That's fun. It's called The Power of One. And it was about this kid that gets put into a home, South Africa. And I wasn't expecting that question, but I liked it because he's went in at an early age. They beat the hell out of him there. He was abused, and he turned out to be the welterweight champion of the world. And I like that story because, going through hardships and coming out the way he did on the backside, it's just a wonderful story. I read a lot of political books and other things, but that's one where as I have time, I enjoy that one. And yeah, I find in politics, I actually, I find I say more prayers than most asking for guidance. And, I'm not a scripture guy, but it's where I quote things like that, but I believe in that. And it's, I think the more I think that, I run my world as characters who you are when no one but God is watching. And I don't get much past that other than I need to run my life in a way that when it's all over, I can say I made good decisions that moved us forward. So, but.
Okay. Biggest challenge facing Kansas?
The outflow of people is concerning. Affordability and tax policy.
What was your first job?
Throwing hay on the farm.
Yeah.
I forgot we didn't get paid for that.
Is that really considered a job then?
It was a
paying job.
I sat on the bench at Century Van Lines moving furniture when I was a kid in high school.
Really?
Cut grass for grandparents and everybody. It's a small town, right? Mm-hmm. So, but it's, the company I came back and bought 17 years ago, I actually worked at it when I was a kid.
That's interesting. I don't know that many people know that story.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of stories. I'm not too talkative.
Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
My old man, leave the world better than you found it. We all have some version of that we want to follow, but he says that and he means it, and always be respectful, and he can be contentious and grumpy, but it's, those are good things to live by, and respecting humans, even when they're not reciprocating, is you always can look back on that and be happy you did it.
Is leadership earned or given?
Oh, respect is probably earned. Leadership, you can have a title, you're a leader, but no one's going to follow you if you're barking and not leading by example. Yeah.
One regulation you'd eliminate tomorrow if you had the ability.
Barriers to entry for businesses. We need to eradicate and make life easier for small businesses to live and operate. We love to put all these little new rules. Not we, people, and the policy over the years, and I think we can, minimizing barriers to entry, regulatory issues that don't create risk, dangerous risk. Mm-hmm. I think there's plenty of that. We have tax code and policy that's way too thick, and books are too thick for a state with 2 million, just over 2 million people.
Who is your most influential mentor?
Oh, you got me on the cheesy track.
I do.
So, I have a lot of folks that I've learned from being in running $1 billion businesses. You come across a lot of interesting people, and they all bring something different to the table. I tend to take pieces of things even from folks I didn't respect. There's always something you can learn from that. You add that into your arsenal of leadership, and you look to move forward and try and make the best decisions you can make. And I'm definitely flawed on some of those things. We're all learning, always learning. When you stop learning, hopefully you're dead at that point. But it's a ever evolving growth opportunity. Hard work, grandpa, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just a little fun fact. Yeah, I think it was the last worker to take the toll on the bridge before they eliminated the toll.
That's a
grandma that worked in the back room making the dinners for the Catholic Church for the school. You just look at that, and people just work to get home and do the best they can to raise their kids, and I just kind of look at all of those as wonderful examples of how we can all be good humans and do the best we can.
What do you think is one thing people misunderstand about you?
Oh, most of it's not. I don't think it's misunderstanding. Our world likes to make opinions and decisions on what they think they know in a snapshot. And we're all a little more complicated than that. So I would say that, I'm open to a conversation, and if I look like I'm scowling, I'm probably thinking and busy, and I get constant feedback. I need to smile more. So I think that I'm always looking for ways to move us all forward. And that's how I spend my time. I have a beautiful wife and kids that are assets to society and working hard, but it's, I probably have a strong hand raising everybody that's in my family. So it's giving them who they are today as well. But, I don't know if I have anything that people that misunderstand me, but in our political world, everybody, if you have an R or a D, you already think you know somebody, and there's probably an opportunity to advance common legislation we can all probably support. Most everything we do is bipartisan in the Senate today and the legislature today. A lot of it is the vast majority of what we advance is. There's a handful of our edge issues that wouldn't be a part of that, but it's for the most part, most of what we advance is bipartisan, and we all like to get bird up about left and right when we can all probably figure out how we can move forward together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Final question. This is the hard one, and I don't want you to take the political road on this one. Chiefs or Royals?
I love my Chiefs. I grew up playing football, so, and I love baseball too, but no, I'm a Chiefs fan. Yeah. like the Royals too. They got a lot of games. I like going to a game. A Sunday afternoon game is when you want. That's to me. That's a good Royals day, or just an afternoon game in general when it's not August.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Senator, thank you for joining us. This has been fun. You always have so much to say. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
I think you're going to do great things for us, and I look forward to seeing what you accomplish.
I appreciate it. Thank you.